Okay, so welcome everybody. The numbers are thinning out a bit now, but we'll hope that we have a stimulating enough discussion that more people start coming in. This discussion is about skills for the future and the fact that we're in the middle of a fourth industrial revolution, which is likely to have as much, if not more, impact on our lives as the preceding three. We will talk about how do we ensure that this fourth, that will be molded very much by a new wave of innovation, or as is happening now, from driverless cars to smart robotics, 3D printing, artificial intelligence. How do we ensure that it's something not to fear, but something to embrace? How do we see the promise in it and not the peril? How do we ensure it's not just about money, but about what it is to be human? And how do we ensure that it's also inclusive, particularly for those parts of the world that still battle famine and lack of clean running water and all of these things? And of course, how do we prepare our children for the future and for jobs that don't exist yet? Any lack in faith I might have in humanity right now and our ability to get our act together could be wiped away more or less, I think, by the people on our panel who offer individually and collectively a hugely inspiring perspective on life. And I will introduce them. On my right is Conrad Wolfram. He has an MA from Cambridge University, where he read physics and mathematics, and he is a technologist and the chief executive officer, I think, of Wolfram Research Europe, which he works in alongside his brother. Yeah?
With the Atlantic in between us. The Atlantic in between us usually, which is good.
Okay. And you're a huge advocate for the reform of maths education in schools, arguing that greater use needs to be made of information technology with a stress on computer-based math. In your spare time, if you have much of it, then you like to take photos and you play the piano. And Conrad, you've said that one of the problems of our education system is that people come out of it not even having any sense of maths. They don't feel it, you've said. And as somebody who's a bit of an arithmophobe, I think that's the phrase, I learnt it yesterday for the first time, with a bit of a fear for numbers and arithmetic, I really warm to your position. So we look forward to hearing what you've got to tell us about that. To his right is Lili Milani, and Lili is a senior research fellow of the Estonian Genome Center of the University of Tartu, is that right? And the head of the Genotyping and Sequencing Core Facility. Yeah. And last year, when he awarded her the Estonian Young Scientist of the Year prize, President Toomas Hendrik Ilves described her as an outstanding scientist who had taken Estonia, her research team, and her university to the top of the world with her. So your main research spheres are genomics, epigenomics, and, pardon? Epigenomics, sorry. And I'm the generalist here. I'm not the person with the knowledge, as you can tell. And pharmacogenomics, yeah? Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay. And one of the main aims of her research is to ease the diagnosis of serious genetic diseases. And she told me last night that I could get a map of my DNA for about $1,000.
Yes.
Yeah. And when I asked her what she does in her free time, she says, "What free time?" She has 2 young children. And you have written, Lili, that due to rapid development of technology, we can predict much of our future. And we can assume, therefore, individual ownership of our personal genomic and health data. That patients are increasingly participating in the overall management of their own health and becoming co-actors with the doctors and scientific community. You're a great advocate for big data and how that can be used to improve our lives. And you've said that the balance between nature and nurture is increasingly put in a new light with our knowledge, the knowledge that we have. So I maybe would ask you in a minute to expand on that and explain what you mean by that.
Absolutely.
Okay. I have here, on the outer left is Jalakas, yeah? And he has a 2-year-old daughter who can count to 10 in both Estonian and English. But he says that has nothing to do with Lingfist, which is the language learning tool he co-founded, which claims to, I'm bringing a bit of skepticism into that, but you can tell us why it's to be proven. It claims to accelerate by mathematical modeling and statistical analysis our language learning. And you have a background in banking and finance, and in October 2015, the Lingfist team was recognized as the brightest startup during the Tallinn Entrepreneurship Awards. Yeah. So I'm really excited about this, not least as someone who spent the past 31 years learning German, and still discovering that, even though you're fluent in the language, that there's still a lot you have to learn. And in our conversation last night over roll mops and wine, you made some quite big claims that you said you could revolutionize language learning in Europe. You could potentially stop the economic stagnation in Japan by improving people's knowledge of English. And you also said you could provide a sense of perspective and an antidote to boredom for many thousands of refugees in Jordan and Lebanon in a collaborative project that you have going, or you're starting with the United Nations.
All correct.
So we can hopefully talk more about that, yeah? Okay, and then to my left is Kathleen Naglee. Kathleen has been the director of the International School in Estonia, here in Tallinn, since 2012. She's an award-winning international teacher, and over 24 years you've championed progressive pedagogical practices, academic rigor, diversity and creativity. You're originally from Philadelphia, USA, and you have many other roles as well, amongst them using holistic methods to teach disadvantaged children in Italy, and you also teach the theory of knowledge to international baccalaureate students, as well as yoga and fitness to parents and students. And amongst your hobbies are Ashtanga yoga and poetry. And you have a son. And I noticed on a website, Rate My Professors, that one of your former students had written, "She is passionate about helping her students become world changers. She'll go the extra step to help her students comprehend as long as she sees there is a desire on the student side." Kathleen, you've said the root of all historical comprehension lies in the individual's mental relationship to his or her own life experience. We will talk about that, hopefully, expand on that, and you can tell us a little bit more about what you mean. So my name is Kate Connolly, and I'm a journalist with about 20 years experience, and I live currently in Berlin. I have 2 young children, and if I had any fears that they were not being inspired creatively at the moment, then they've been allayed by the fact that we have just got an Estonian au pair who grew up in the circus, and she was an acrobat, and she's teaching my kids all sorts of acrobatic tricks. So I feel like they're being prepared for the future in a way I had never quite imagined they would be. Okay, so maybe, Kathleen, I could go back to you and that quote that I just made, if I can find it again. And I would ask you to expand on that and say, how important is our memory and experience in helping us learn and prepare for the future?
Well, we know now from science that the best methods to learn anything is through empathy. So when you have a teacher or a relationship with someone that you admire or that you find an experience that touches you, the chances of you understanding that topic are at a much higher level. So I believe that an educational experience must have this at the core of how we teach and how we set up a school, that I believe there has to be this core of compassion that is surrounding the child and in the development of the environment itself. Currently in schools around the world, it's the exact opposite of that. It's a world that denies identity. It's a world that puts children in a lockstep, military-style version of education. And most of us remember in our lives somebody that was inspirational to us, a teacher that you really admired and that you found some special connection with. And it's often this relationship that has to be fostered in education. And going back to the issue about memory and our own experience, and the talk, if you were here earlier today, we were talking about refugee experience. And I'm the daughter of a refugee. My mother was born in a refugee camp. And from what we were talking about, the experience of how that challenges your life and changes your life is instrumental to everything that happens. For me as an American, why am I back in Eastern Europe? Because that's where my grandmother came from. And it's this dialogue of memory and history that happens to us in our own identity.
And is it you're in Estonia? Is that because this is an ideal place to do it? Is Estonia more open to your approach, do you think, than other places might be?
Well, I'm very lucky that I'm a small school director, which gives me the opportunity to do what I want in many ways. So our school has been very innovative from the beginning, and in the last few years, for example, we were the first to fully integrate technology into our program, iPads and all these sorts of things. But what we're really pushing is this idea of relationships and environment, and what is meaningful to children is deep learning. And if you want your child to go off and do great things, then you must show them what that looks like, and you must talk about it, and you must have deep conversations with children. And most of our educational systems remove that possibility from your child's life. So I believe in a radical upturning of the educational system. And as these others will be discussing, the world of technology is going to upturn it anyway. So when we redesign what must happen, I hope this is at the core.
Conrad, redesigning. This is a subject close to your heart, I think.
Yes, indeed. I mean, we've been focused on thinking about maths. Maths is one of these subjects that's, across the world, one of the few subjects people believe that everyone should learn for at least 10 years of their life. And yet, the maths that most people are learning in schools is pretty disconnected from the maths in the outside world today, and in fact becoming more so over time. You also add to that most students, teachers, employers, governments are all concerned about failures to teach people enough or maths that seems to work. And you wonder why this is and whether it can ever be fixed. And I actually think this is a case where the real world has moved and we didn't figure out how to change education to match. And so in the real world, there's a huge change that happened in maths, which is we got the best machinery that anyone could ever have thought we would ever get to do calculations, called a computer, or computing. And that's what's allowed maths to be this subject that everybody thinks they want to do and is so empowering jobs and economies and individuals. In education, we've decided we're going to forget that the computer exists for 8 or 10 years, make people basically learn how to pretend to be computers. And we're turning out largely third-rate human computers rather than what we need to turn out, which is first-rate problem solvers who have deep knowledge of how to solve problems using the power of mathematics and computing and coding. And so we set about trying to change this. It's kind of like we're in a pivotal position to do this because my other hat, we run Wolfram, and we've been building computation software for, well, it's actually, I was going to say 25 years, but time has moved on. It's more like 28 years now. And so we're connected with the users of maths in virtually every way you can imagine around the world. And so, in a sense, we're seeing it from all angles, and we're seeing this huge divergence. And so we set about trying to rethink the curriculum from scratch for maths and figure out what is it that you actually need to learn, assuming a computer exists. So start from the idea the computer exists and rebuild the curriculum. And nobody's really done this before. And Estonia was the first place as a country that was interested in piloting this, and we've done that in probability statistics, and we're starting to redo that. But it's only a very early start. And I think one of the interesting questions that perhaps we should come back to is, often when technology is talked about in education, people confuse two different uses of it. One use is take the real world, which has all the modern technology in it, and use that and replicate that in education. Because you need, the education is presumably to, so to speak, release the animals into the real world afterwards. And it's kind of like, if you're not using the right technology, then you're not going to have the right setup for helping people to get ready for the real world. The second thing that people talk about with technology is how you use technology to improve pedagogy and also potentially assessment. And almost all the conversations I hear around education are about the second of those. It's about, you know, we're going to teach it, be it maths or history or whatever, and we're going to use technology to teach it better. The problem is the it isn't defined properly. In the case of maths, it's probably about 80% wrong. So I think we need to be careful to separate those two and make sure that we're using the technology in primarily to replicate the real world, but also to improve how we get to that point.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to come to you, Lili, now, because using technology to, as we've said, to improve our lives, and your question about use of big data. It's a phrase that scares some people and excites others. As I mentioned, this whole idea you said that the balance between nature and nurture is increasingly being put into a new light. And can you expand on that and explain to us what you mean by that?
Yes, so one of the issues I think is that we have loads of data in different databases, health databases, or these tiny devices generating lots of data regarding people's lifestyle and many other things, and medical tests that are run every other week. And nobody's actually using this data for improving health right now, and we can use great mathematics and statistics to model the effect of all kinds of exposures. And one big shift that we want to see come about in the near future is a shift from reactive medicine to proactive medicine to actually prevent disease instead of treat disease. And the ultimate tool for actually predicting disease would be our DNA, which is there from birth or even before that. And why do we wait for people to get sick before we start looking into their health and figure out how to prevent disease? And these are really the topics that are close to my heart and that we are trying to work towards. So on the one hand, we're doing research to see which genes are associated with what diseases, which genes are associated with different drug responses. But we also have a duty to start implementing this in the healthcare system because there's a lot of information that we have and that could be used today. And I think that's our duty to start implementing that.
So it's a lot to do with empowering people as well.
Exactly, and I think another change that we're seeing in society right now is a shift towards patient-centric healthcare, where the patient is really taking charge of their health, and they should own their own records. Like Estonia was one of the first countries to create electronic health records with full access to all of the citizens, and this is a movement that is going global now, and still in the US, for example, you actually have to pay for getting access to some of your health records, which seems quite absurd to us. And there's different ways that patients could regulate how their data can be used for research as well. We need big data to make big conclusions. And there's different ways we're working towards a new kind of consent called dynamic consent, where the individual can actually actively be involved in giving consent to different studies and take ownership of their own data.
Okay, so this sense I'm getting of this data can be used positively to empower people, and the big data, the way that can be used as well to benefit the whole, but also making people feel that as an individual they can aspire to something. It fits in quite well, Oit, with your Linkfist project, which is a lot to do with the more data you gather about an individual and their ability to learn the language, and also the more people you have learning the language, the more interactions there can be, or the more, I'm expressing it very badly, but the more data there is, the easier it is for you to offer a tool for people to learn the language. Maybe you can explain it better.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot to do with data, and it's a lot to do how to use the data. Before of this panel, we were talking with Conrad and Lili, and we are all working in different fields, and some of us have like 28 years of experience. We started like almost 3 years ago. So, but I mean, the experience that we are having is very much the same, or I'm surprised how much is it the same. And then people talk about, what you, Conrad, said, like people talk about utilizing computers as a sort of magical tools to improve learning, but I don't think that we should sort of utilize computers as such. What we are trying to do in linguistics, we're actually trying to utilize the computing power of computers. We don't really believe that computers are changing the human nature, but we are sort of trying to employ the CPU of every computer to make the learning easier for them. The learning process as such is still very much human. And how come we are doing so, or is it a bold statement to say that we are doing so? I can say it because our sort of the roots of our company are in the Center of European Nuclear Studies in CERN, when the machine learning algorithms were built to discover the Higgs boson a couple of years ago. And my co-founder might happen to be one of the members of the core team. And basically, after having discovered the Higgs boson, he had access to all the computing power of CERN computers there, and he, in the evening hours, basically played around with the computer and tried to utilize a simplified version of his machine learning algorithms to teach himself French, having like very much mathematics, physics biased person who is not really, I may say it so, not really talented to languages. He managed to teach himself French within weeks. So, and this was a sort of surprising result that encouraged us to make it big, or to really to build something on it. And this is only one part of it, sort of a CPU. Another thing is that neither Mait nor myself have a strong background in linguistics. We haven't studied linguistics in the university. And still, I would claim that the sort of the linguistics really professionals are doing in our universities today are stuck sort of 30 to 40 years back, the methodology as such. That's why the sort of professions as computational linguist, which is basically someone who tries to use CPU to analyze languages, to model languages, to teach languages. It's a very rare sort of field, and if there is any computational linguist in the auditorium here, you could come to talk to me and we will hire you right away, actually. So it's very rare animal to find, to be honest. So by combining the CPU and combining the language as such, we have managed to reach these results. That's what we are reaching right now and showing. I mean, probably we are going there, but one of the, you are coming from the school, which is a sort of institutionalized form of learning new things. And I personally find it rather, how would I put it in a polite way, something we need to restart, really, because I find this institutionalized ways of educating our kids and ourselves these are actually the brakes or the stagnating power of changing the world and making it more open and creative.
So stagnation, fighting against stagnation.
Yeah,
that's
I
a good
absolutely
term for
agree.
you, yeah.
And unfortunately, the governments and the pressure on education is to do the exact opposite. It's going towards, as you said, the focus on assessment of rote learning. In my opinion, the entire process of how we think of school and its purpose is off track for this century completely. And even the buildings and the design, the bell schedules, all of these things promote a 19th century view of education where we should be using the power of, as you said, we don't want to make third-rate computers. And this is what we're asking our students to be, and we're testing them on this. And the only way to get into university is to pass these ridiculous exams that are meaningless for modern needs and skills. So I believe that there needs to be an absolutely radical transformation, and part of that is taking away the expectation that the learning is about routine cognitive work. It should be about non-routine cognitive work, which is based on hands-on experience, which is based on creativity. But convincing parents of this is very, very difficult. We live in a society that wants to believe what we know now is what our children should know, and it's not the case.
So maybe I could just add something.
Yeah,
I completely agree with that. I mean, one of the big problems in education right now is that the sort of ecosystem is set up in a way that basically stops change. And it's sort of bizarre how it's got that way. It's a mixture of sort of, teaching unions, assessment, governments, all who sort of collectively mean that the thing is kind of frozen in time. And one of the questions is how to break that down. Unfortunately, practically, the linchpin of that probably is assessment, sadly. And in fact, one of the problems with this is the concept of where you need evidence. In fact, I wrote a blog recently about, evidence-led innovation versus innovation-led evidence. So the problem is that the normal thing that happens, particularly with governments, is they say, we can't try anything new until we have the evidence that it works. Well, it's kind of hard to do that, right? Because if you want to do anything other than a micro step, you don't have the evidence because it's new by definition. And so you get in this loop where nothing new really can get tried. Now, actually, in medicine, some of the time, you do get the opposite, which is where you try something. I mean, you make a good educated guess, hopefully, and, it's like, you do some collimation of the idea to try something, but then you test it after you've tried it. You try it, see what the result is, run randomized controlled tests or whatever it is, and see what happens. We need much more of that in education. We need to actually try things and then do reasonably sensible testing. And back on the testing, I mean, in many ways one would like assessment not to be driving things, but it's hard to set that up. I mean, in fact, this is a societal problem generally, which is that numbers have assumed an importance often beyond their ability to judge. And assessment is a key place where that's happened. So I think one way you can improve that, at least, is to have the assessment more open-ended in terms of what the questions are. So away from multiple choice and much more to questions that have fuzzy answers. I mean, running a company, it's incredibly rare I have a question where I know that there are 5 possible answers of which one is right and the other 4 are wrong. This just doesn't come up very often. It's much more, well, you could do it this way and here are the trade-offs and here's what might happen. It's a judgment call. We need to replicate in our assessment what real life is like as much as possible, even if it's harder to mark and assign a number to. And I think there needs to be that drive into fairness means representing the real world, not just how easy it is to mark.
Lili, would you go along with that, Conrad's assessment that maybe in the world of medicine there's perhaps less resistance out of necessity to find answers to things?
Yeah, absolutely, because in medicine we're always working towards finding new and better treatments. Why are we not using that in education? And another thing we found in common with the linguist was also this, that we, both in medicine, in treating patients and in educating children, were designing everything according to the average individual, which doesn't exist. the average patient should get a 500 milligram dose of paracetamol. The average student should learn English according to this pace, but that really doesn't exist. And we need new methods, we need new tools to change all of this.
Is it not then some people argue, or governments with budgets and things argue that it's actually very expensive to have this personalised approach, that it's actually easier to just have the sort of one size fits all, like, for example, the idea that you give statins to every person over the age of, over a certain age in order to prevent them having heart attacks, even though there could be a much better approach by saying, okay, if people were exercising more, or if we were not selling off school playing fields in the UK, kids would be more inclined to be active from an early age, that type of thing, that it's actually that it narrows the possibilities.
Yeah, I think those are extremely lazy and costly solutions that, 50% of the individuals are not going to respond to statins because of their genetic makeup, and 15% are going to get adverse drug reactions and severe muscle pain because of the statins, because they cannot metabolize the drug. So it actually only costs, I think that's one of the great developments that have taken place in DNA analysis technology, that we have significant drops in analysis costs, and you could actually generate a genome map of an individual for using these common variants that we know what they actually do for less than €100. And that's something that the individual would have for their entire lifetime. And you won't need to repeat that test, and based on that you can then stratify individuals for screening programs based on their high genetic risk. You can tailor their treatment based on their metabolic profile, and many other tools that you can use this information for.
But looking from the pessimist side, there's a lot of people who'd be a bit scared about this data getting out there, that insurance companies can use it against you if, for example, they know you have a genetic disposition to Huntington's disease, for example, that they could then refuse to insure you. You're reliant on good governance maybe and a good legal framework to ensure that doesn't happen, but often there are shortcomings in that, or a lack of those fields keeping up with the technological developments.
Yeah, absolutely. As a scientist, we see those parts as the boring side of science, but we are working very closely with legal, with ethics, with these different topics, and even with data security to generate methods that could keep the DNA analysis secure. You have secure servers. You can think about how these blockchain technologies should come into medicine and actually protect everything. And we are working in our research also together with different data security scientists as well, and ethicists and legal requirements to really protect the patient against any kind of distrust and mistrust.
You were talking when we met last night about incentivizing people to be healthy, and one thing you said was you could introduce taxes, and that made me, I thought, oh gosh, what direction are you going in? Can you explain a little bit more about that? Why you think that's a good thing, and why you think is there the potential for that going into a dangerous territory?
I guess I was just breaking up other people's ideas that have been introduced, but what really is that important is that we recognize how important our lifestyle is for our health, and we really cannot blame our genes for being obese, for being not living a healthy lifestyle. So if we could find different ways of encouraging people to live a healthier lifestyle, which again goes back to education, and at least there is statistics in Estonia that says that when children start school, their physical activity goes down, and that's one change that we need to make very quickly to stop that drop and keep children physically active, eating a healthy diet, and taking care of their health.
Kathleen, as a yoga instructor, I'm sure that you have a stress on physical education in school.
Yeah, wellness is, I think, something that is essential for good learning and building a healthy lifestyle. So again, if we're reimagining what education should be, we should be using the power of to individualize, just like you were saying with DNA. It's an incredible waste of money that we spend on education when 50% of the patients don't get it. 50% of the patients are lost to society because we have not individualized their needs and their experiences and their strengths. We know that in terms of wellness, that students who are active, students who are healthy, students who play sports achieve more, do more, are better at what they do. Yet, if you look like places in the US, recess is being canceled so that they can have more testing. So, again, what we see is what is needed in education. Most governments, most societies are pushing the wrong initiatives. To me, education needs to have an incredible social experience that is about our health, our bodies, our lives, our identity, and this negates the pressure that is happening from the rest of the world, saying, look at the PISA scores, which are a ridiculous test if you ask me. Look how well we do because we score on these tests that really show absolutely nothing. So until we can understand the framework of the evaluation is wrong, we're not ready to make the leap. But I believe groups like Linguists and what they're doing is showing that there's going to be an educational revolution to take over where the current schools are not able to use the technology to our advantage. So why not have linguists starting in schools at an early age? Because, hey, you know what? That program's going to be better at teaching language than maybe what we're doing now. So we have to accept that some things are going to be better with artificial intelligence, and that's okay. But what do we want from our children? Is we want them to be those who value each other and others, as we saw again earlier today. Why do we have so much hatred in the world? Well, this problem has not been solved in the last 60 years in Europe, obviously, and in America. We have not addressed the core issue of how we teach children to love others.
We're focusing a lot on obviously on the Western world, and you have told me about your attempts to use Linkfist for less advantaged people. So with the UN, you were saying that you want to introduce it to refugee camps in Jordan and Lebanon, where people could then learn English initially. And maybe you tell us a bit about that and how we're then expanding this to talk about how we can ensure that technology is something that is inclusive and benefits a lot more people.
Indeed, actually, UN has contacted linguists to find out whether we are able to provide refugee camps in Jordan, in Lebanon, with our language learning tool, because there are thousands of people who are living in the tents and who have a lot of time available and who could use the time to educate themselves, to prepare themselves to either returning to their country or going on to some other countries to learn English or German, based on Arabic mostly at the current moment. So, and what is needed to enable linguists as a service is obviously you need a data connection, as we are a database service. So UN is basically agreed with telecom operators that they are providing some good access at a discounted price to these refugee camps, and then if the data is cheaply available, then the service providers, linguists being one of them, are able to get access to these people. And you don't necessarily need to gather all the people to the classroom 8 hours a day, but they can sort of do the majority of the curriculum individually and then come to the classroom once a week or twice a week when they get a personalized tutor who basically knows the weaknesses of each and everyone and can focus on the weaknesses only. So it makes it much more efficient, the overall learning process. Basically, not only in the refugee camps, but we have sort of at the back of napkin did some calculations in the sort of public school service here in Estonia, and in general it's sort of 11 years here, and we have calculated that if one would apply linguists to teach and learn languages here, one could actually skip 1 year out of these 10. And you can basically, as a society, you have like one extra year of each and every one. So you can either teach people additional skills and knowledges, arts, engineering, math, or when you can get them to universities earlier, or to get a job earlier, so they can start giving back. So as a society, you basically win a lot of wealth based on this one. So it's not only the sort of developing words, but it's also the semi-developed world as Estonia. So it's.
But ultimately, you want it to be like that. If you can learn, you'd have certain languages in your system, as it were, and then you could kind of cross-pollinate, as it were. So you could have, if you have Arabic and German, then you could learn Arabic, or you could learn German, or you could learn Estonian or Spanish. Is that right? That's your ultimate goal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But the algorithm as such is universal, so we basically only need to build this language modules, so to say, and this is exactly the thing we are doing right now. So,
because being Germany-based, I'm seeing every day at the moment, with 1 million refugees having arrived last year, that and their main access to integration is the German language, but there's a limited number of teachers, and there's a limited number of physical places that they can go, and there's a lot of people who are have been stranded, and it's obviously that whole it's not helping, and so you could imagine how an application like Linkfist could really benefit that situation.
Yeah, one of the evidences, or early evidences, what we have at the algorithm we use and the tool we are building, it works extremely well if combined with a private tutor. So it's basically, if number of teachers is rather limited, you can, each and every teacher can spend less time on each student, while they can focus on the weaknesses. So as we were earlier, we were talking about this average person who doesn't exist. So, and if you say, okay, individualized, personalized curriculum is expensive, I mean, but this average curriculum doesn't exist. It doesn't have any final results, so it's a waste of money, basically. So it actually makes sense to spend only and only on the personalized curriculum and program. So
if people are happy to do so, it'd be quite nice to open it up a bit to the floor, and for you maybe to ask some questions to the panelists, if people have got anything they're pressing to talk about.
My name is Kari Kasper from Tallinn University of Technology. It was very fascinating to hear about your discussion about the personalization and individualization of whatever education, health. I think this is where the world is going. You know, we're moving from the mass production paradigm to a totally different, which means that all of the society's structures have to change, and that's inevitable. And this is driven by ICT as the main technological economic paradigm of these days. But my question is that talking about these personalized, options and incentives, there is a danger that we are losing individual autonomy and choice, because if my educational choices or my educational paths or my health paths are determined by my, analysis of my DNA or skills or whatever that have been similar to people like me in the past, that this, aren't we moving to a world where there is significantly less personal freedom, individual choice, individual autonomy, when we are actually whatever we are going to do is kind of predetermined and perhaps mildly incentivized. We're pushed to be this kind of person because this is what the algorithm or the big data tells you that this is what you should be. And aren't we losing then creativity? Aren't we losing this kind of moving, having this kind of things that we could not predict from the past that we do not know what's going to happen. We try kind of model the future after the past, but that's not possible, as you also mentioned in the beginning. So just this kind of thought.
Good
And
point.
I'd love to hear your comments.
Who would like to?
I
Yeah.
can just start with, of course, everyone will still have the free choice to take the drug that will give you an adverse drug reaction and the drug that won't give you an adverse drug reaction. But when we talk about disease risk calculations, of course, we're presenting them in a way that help the individual get empowered to make a change in their lifestyle, because you can't change your genes, you can't really change the DNA. But you can be aware that if you keep increasing your waist circumference or body mass index, you're going to increase your risk for disease. But if you reduce it, you're going to decrease your risk. And these are the kinds of information that we would like to communicate back to individuals based on their DNA. And we could also use that for creating screening programs, for example, for breast cancer, where right now in Estonia we're screening everyone above the age of 50, but many people are actually getting breast cancer much earlier, but we don't have the resources to start the screening programs earlier. If we do offer this genome test to all of the population, we can then target this screening program for those individuals at higher genetic risk or who are predisposed to get breast cancer, and catch those cases much more efficiently. But of course, everyone should still have the free choice whether they would like to have their DNA analyzed or not, whether they want to be part of this, and whether they want to choose the better treatment or not.
So I agree with that. I think the way I look at this is you've got to, I don't equate personalization with the computer necessarily driving. So I think it's a question of who's driving, or at least what parameters are you driving or not driving within, versus whether the computer is informing the next step based on what you want. And I think there are areas to be experimented with. I mean, if you take education as an example, there are people who say, the child should drive everything, right? As in, you shouldn't have any fixed subjects or anything. The problem with that is I don't know how the child can know what it is that there is out there to drive. So that's one extreme. The other extreme seems to me to be, you've got to do all these subjects. In my case, I had to do all these languages. In fact, being British, we don't do very well at learning languages, and so I speak no languages, having learned French for I don't know how many years. I basically speak no French, and I don't know why I need to speak it anyway. But I speak some Latin, which is particularly useful, and I found very modern in its outlook. It's the question is, sort of how you marry up kind of what's needed for an individual and for society as there's a societal need for something versus what people should drive themselves. And I think there's a lot of realignment to happen in that. I think there are a lot of things where, one of the problems with maths is one of the arguments I get into with mathematicians, who some of the pure crowd don't like me very much for what I say about maths. And the problem is that they say, well, maths is sort of important, and it's important you do it, and, etc. I'm a fine mathematician, and that's why it's sort of... But then you get down to it, and you find that maybe only 2% of the users of mathematics in the outside world are mathematicians. The other 98% are engineers, or artists, or musicians, whatever it is. And so then you start to break down this argument, and you realize that, if there is a general subject of maths that's empowering for the individual and empowering for society, it isn't the subject they thought it was. If somebody gets interested, however, in what I would call the history of hand calculating, our current maths curriculum, if they get interested in that, it's great for them to pursue it. I'm not negative about that. I think if they get excited about it, if that's a line of inquiry they find interesting, fantastic, then you're already winning in terms of their self-empowerment. But so we've got to distinguish, and maybe it's true in medicine as well, but certainly true in education in my view, you've got to distinguish things that are sort of necessary for the person's well-being, and if necessary, putting a little bit of force on to make that happen, at least for some period of time, and important for societal improvement, and things that are kind of like, it's exciting for the person who does it and get people to excited by doing it themselves, but that you shouldn't force everyone to do it if that's kind of, there's no good reason for achieving that. And I think those two get mixed up. I mean, just back to the point about personalization in general. I mean, really what's happened is the cost, I mean, traditionally, you know, if you had an individual tutor for everyone all the time, the cost of that's very high. The point is that technology allows you potentially to have personalization without the high cost. And that's true in data analysis and medicine, it's true in education. There's a question as to what the human computing interface is for that. So again, you know, there's a question of to what extent human doctors should be doing diagnostics versus automated diagnostics and personalization and data that drives that. Same question, I think, in education. Where is the human doing it, and where is the computer trying to figure out what to do? One thing that helps to drive people's own self-driving of the education and health and other things is data that you can actually access. And with my other hat on, with Wolfram Alpha, which is our knowledge engine, which goes behind some of the queries on Siri, one of the big problems when governments do open data is that they don't understand the difference between things being open and things being accessible. So in fact, I was in The Guardian once, your home, and the government in the UK just released all this data, very proud of the fact we now have open data. All the data that we paid for in the UK, citizens can now access. The problem was that this data had been released, and I think there were about 20 or 15 Guardian journalists, all sitting analysts with their computers at this table, spending the day figuring out what anything meant or any queries they could get out of this data that had been released. And I thought to myself, yup, that's open, but it isn't accessible. And if you want people to take decisions on the basis of data that is available, it's also got to be accessible. Otherwise, they can't take sensible decisions off it.
Anybody else?
If I can go back to the original question, there is a danger when we're identifying certain skills of children at a very early age and then pushing them towards a very particular subject area. This is happening in China right now. They understand they need more engineers, for example, so they're identifying children at the age of maybe 10, 11, 12 years old who may have skills that are more targeted towards engineering, so immediately putting them into pre-engineering type programs, whether they like it or not, in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and with the anticipation that the rest of their learning will be towards engineering, and then they'll go to university and they will become engineers. This takes away student choice, student voice, and to me, it's a denial of an individual's identity. You may be excellent at math or computation or whatever, but maybe that's not your love. So I think there is a danger when data may be used against children and their own possibilities of becoming the person who they want to be.
You've talked with me about this, about the pressure that we feel in the West coming from China and the achievement of the school, in the school system there, where a British minister will quite quickly fly over to China to try and find out why they're doing something better than us if Chinese students perform better in, say, a maths exams.
Yeah, I mean, there was a specific example I think we talked about, which I wrote an article when our fine minister was decided. The PISA scores came out, I think maybe 18 months ago on maths. And actually, Estonia was top of Europe. But Britain, as characteristically, was sort of mostly far down, maybe half, I don't know. I think we beat the US just or something. So, of course, panic, how come Britain's all this stuff hasn't made any impact? And so they fly the minister over to Shanghai, which I think came top, although I've never known that Shanghai was a country, but anyway. Shanghai came top, and, so they fly the minister out to find out all about this. And what I was trying to say was what we actually need is people playing on the right playing field. So in the case of maths, that's real maths of the outside world, not Shanghai maths. Means, maybe Shanghai maths is in some sense traditionally slightly better, or maybe it isn't, than British maths, but it's basically completely on the wrong playing field. And what's interesting to me is some of the characteristics of creativity and not believing what you're told by your government and being skeptical and, kind of arguing and not being too obedient and these sorts of things are actually some of the real value adds that humans bring above modern computing. And actually, I think what we may find in sort of if you take Estonian culture or British or American, some of these sorts of style of cultures where you're encouraged to some extent for that, and perhaps should be encouraged more by the schooling, is that this is a playing field that's really, in fact, ends up being economically beneficial as well as being probably what people enjoy in their societies. And actually, it's not clear to me that sort of very regimented, procedural problem solving, which mostly a computer can do, is the right playing field or something on which countries like Estonia can do particularly well. Whereas I think this other playing field of this much more creative problem-solving approach, using the tools where you can, with a much more open-ended result, is in fact much more connected with the society that already exists, and we would in fact do much better at it anyway.
I think what you are talking about is very much to do with engagement, and you as well. If you find something engaging when you want to do it and you want to develop yourself, and the engagement in my world is a derivative of getting results. So this is where linguist is quite good at, getting fast results and getting the talented people engaged and willing to improve their skills of different languages even more. There's a good example we use in our standard PowerPoint or keynote investor pitch. That's an average Korean student uses some 14,000 hours to learn English, and still we all know that while you go to South Korea, when the English skills are not that excellent there. So it's just you need to apply a little bit smarter way of learning, and you can actually get them sort of going from black into white. You can get outstanding results.
Would anybody else like to ask something? There were two examples recently of where, artificial intelligence, it gave you a glimpse into the challenges that lie ahead. There was the Google DeepMind artificial intelligence, which won 4 out of 5 of Go matches with a master player. This is the ancient Chinese board game, which you said you know of. You hadn't played it, but you know of it. Yeah.
Not a very good games player anyway, at the best of times.
But they say it takes 3 minutes to learn the rules and 30 years to become a master. And so that, obviously asking the question there, that triggers the question, are computers superior to humans? And then the other example was the Microsoft launching an artificially intelligent robot on Twitter. I think it was last week, and it was supposed to be a fun way of letting people engage with artificial intelligence. And as you've probably read, it ended up, robot ended up spouting a lot of pro-Hitler and genocide messages, and it had kind of been, other Twitter users had sort of manipulated it somehow, or somebody had managed to manipulate it. And it reminded me, it's not dissimilar to a lot of the comments that we're getting at the moment if we write about refugee issues in The Guardian. A lot of bile that people are sending to the site. And so, of course, even though Tay had been tricked, that's the name of this robot, you can see the potential pitfalls of artificial intelligence. I don't know if you'd like to make any remarks on that as to how we strike a balance, see the advantages of it, and...
I can say something to that, perhaps. I mean, firstly, it's not under our control. It's like the things are going to get invented, and we can't uninvent them. So, there's a question as to how we societally react to those inventions. Now, with new directions, there are sort of always, there are positives, and then there are always some negatives that come along. I suspect that, as with most things, with some oscillation, the positives will end up rather outweighing the negatives. I think that the sort of bastions of what is human intelligence versus what is, machine intelligence are kind of getting broken down over time. And it's I think all the sort of past definitions of what defined the difference are sort of, it's kind of like, it's almost like a religious question when, it's like this proves that God exists or doesn't exist. It's kind of like, this proves it's human intelligence or it's not human intelligence. Those tend to drift off. And now, do I actually think that humans will be out of business? Because computers have got, I think that, I mean, the history of this has been that every time, machinery takes over some human task, even things that are considered quite human, in the end, humans step up to a higher level and their standard of living goes up and the machines, just do stuff at a lower level, and in fact, it empowers humans. Now, the problem with that is that there is a huge oscillation in between. It doesn't a smooth change. So that meanwhile, a lot of people might lose their jobs and there might be much unhappiness in that process. But in the end, you can't fight the machine if it's a good machine. The history is that this doesn't work. And I again, am fairly optimistic with this set of changes that actually, it's not a doom story, that in the end it will empower humans to go further and to get, but in the end, it's like if you look at a map of the US, I think the modally largest job, as in more people doing the job than any other in a largest number of states in the US is truck driving. Right? Well, that's going to go away at some point fairly soon because of driverless trucks. And, that's going to cause a big problem. People will say, my goodness, we're going to have all these people out of work from, and there will be a problem over that. It'll be very unhappy for some people, but I don't think that the end result is going to be that humans don't have any jobs to do.
I would add to that, I think the danger of AI in terms of that job fluctuation is what we're seeing is that it used to be that maybe what we'd call blue-collar jobs were being displaced through the machine. The next generation is what we consider white-collar jobs. So we already know that there's some artificial intelligence-type computers that are going to displace those who are financial analysts, for example. So the surprise is going to be that the educational system has not prepared for what will this oscillation that's going to disrupt the lives of those who are going to university now and those who among us who are in white-collar intellectual-type positions. So unless we make radical transformations of education to allow for students to experience more creativity, more skills about very deep learning, very high level of science and things like this, those jobs that we would typically send our students off to who were very good at the system, at completing the tests and at jumping through the hoops, those jobs will not be here 5-10 years from now. So the oscillation is coming, and it's coming for white-collar work, and if you're not a creative type, if you've not taught the skills of inquiry-based learning, then you're going to have struggles that were very much unexpected, I believe.
Just one term to add to that, which is, I sometimes talk about, there's this term, the knowledge economy, which I think was Drucker's term from some point, which I think means that, the economy is driven by white-collar rather than blue-collar workers, basically. And I think the next step is what I call the computational knowledge economy, which is, well, the white-collar thing went because the computers did that, so now we have to step up to this next level, as I think you're describing.
Oit, did you have a positive note as well for us to end on?
I think a lot of have said. Probably the next one is new-collar jobs, because our software developers wear T-shirts mostly. So it's, no, I don't see any catastrophe, because it's the pain we are getting from losing the jobs takes us to the next level, and it's sort of driving the innovation and driving the knowledge creation. So I don't really see a problem there, to be honest.
Okay, so I think that's probably a good point on which to end. Collarless jobs, when we meet here again.
Question.
Okay, excellent, right.
Do you think we'll ever see AI prescribing drugs to humans?
Absolutely. I think at least now what we would like to see doctors start using is automated decision support software, which helps them take in the information regarding the patient's clinical lab measurements and diagnosis, as well as their genetic background, whether they have the enzyme that metabolizes the specific drug they would like to prescribe or not. So the first step would be this kind of automated decision support, but later maybe we could even have automated prescription.
Fully automated, that is.
Sorry?
Fully automated, as I would go to, or I fell ill, and I would go to, I don't know, online, and it would have everything about me, and it's like, okay, you need this and this based on your symptoms, and I'll go to the pharmacy and know what I get.
Yeah, I think whatever information that doctors use to make these kind of informed decisions, why shouldn't computers be able to do that?
Thank you.
And by the way, we'd love to use our technology to help in this process, our computing system of Wolfram Alpha technology as well, and I think it can.
Well, maybe we'll find you all working together in some way, because it seems that there are big connections between all of your fields. And okay.
I have a bit of a provocative question. Gleb, hello. Do you see your jobs being replaced?
Do we see our jobs?
Your own jobs. Journalist, teacher, entrepreneur, DNA researcher, math education pioneer. What are you going to do then? Go to the next level?
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm repeatedly being warned about it. I think it's a good way to kind of keep your, like, to not give pay rises and things like that by saying, you know, there are other people out there who could do this. We can source this out to somebody in India or whatever. You know, I think. I don't know. What do you feel? I don't know.
I mean, I think if I was doing the same job as I did 20 years ago, I would be out of a job. But the job has changed and evolved, and I'm hopefully, maybe other people who I'm managing things don't agree with this, but hopefully I'm stepping up to a higher level. So, I mean, I think actually, if one's honest about what one did along, you know, even a few years ago, it for anybody who's reasonably active in changing what they do, I think one does change. So I'm personally not too worried about it, but we'll see what comes to pass.
I think my job as a director, the chances of that traditional idea that you have a building and you have a person managing people and employment in a certain type of concept that we have now will definitely be gone. There's no doubt that the concept of my job as it is now will not remain.
Actually, I hope it's the case, because what keeps me driving is a change. So I really get bored if the same thing goes on and on all the time. So maybe it's not sort of as a jump off a job, but it's incremental change. So incremental change is behind the drive. I think behind the driving the change and behind the whole sort of drive of energy.
But you've also said that your app, once you've worked out how to make it work for languages,
yeah, when we apply it for mathematics, and then you are out of job, Conrad, basically.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Right. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Yeah.
Thank you for participating in the panel. I have to say that we are a bit back of, we have some time lag, but we'll start 3:50, so please come back and enjoy our last and very interesting panel about migration, urbanism, architecture, and how to create new cities. So you're welcome after 10 minutes. See you.